TK-Solver tutorial. Lists and plotting in TK-Solver. TK-Solver can generate tables and plots of solutions based on equations on the Rules tab. In this example, we enter some values on the Variables tab and solve for the corresponding value y. Suppose we want to study what happens to y as x varies between -10 and 10, with a and b remaining constant. Once we know we can solve for one set of constraints on the Variables tab, we can associate lists of values with any of the variables and solve using the values in those lists. Double-clicking in the status column of a particular variable brings up a set of options. In this case, we want to associate lists with variables y and x. Let's switch to the Lists tab. We can see on the Lists tab that TK-Solver automatically created lists here. We can access either of the lists by right-clicking on the element's name and selecting Display Subsheet from the menu which appears. We can type values into the Value column, or we can let TK-Solver fill the list for us using the List Fill command. For example, let's fill the list for variable x. We can type -10, -9.5, -9, and so on into the value fields, or we can instead use the List Fill command in the Solver tab of the ribbon bar. Open the Solver tab on the ribbon and select List Fill. Select Fill by Step, starting with element number 1, going from -10 to 10 in steps of 0.5 to fill the list. Click the OK button when you're done. Now you should see a list of 41 different values appear in the list of values for variable x. TK-Solver fills the list with 41 values and displays a convenient counter in the element column. Let's use the listsolve command to generate values of y for each value of x. Click on the listsolve button to have TK-Solver populate the list for variable y. We can view the results by right-clicking on the list y in the Lists tab. When the listsolve command is executed, TK-Solver repeatedly processes the equation on the Rules sheet using the constants on the Variables sheet, and each of the values in the associated list x. Next, let's add a table. TK-Solver allows us to create tables for viewing several lists simultaneously. To create a new table, we open the Table tab. We can have many different tables in a single application. We enter T1 as the name of our first table. A title field is also provided. Let's copy the equation from the Rules tab and use it as the title for T1. We can use the standard copy-paste keyboard commands of Ctrl+C and Ctrl+V to do this, or you can also use the copy and paste icons located in the Home tab of the ribbon controller if you prefer to do it this way. Like we did earlier for viewing the values of a variable's list, we need to right-click on the table's name, T1, and select Display Subsheet when the menu appears. You can also use the keyboard shortcut of Ctrl+D to do the same thing. Next, we will define the contents of the table. We now will enter the names of the lists to display in the table by typing X and Y into the list field. By default, TK-Solver assigns column widths of 10 characters to each list, and uses the list names as column headings. As we did to reach the subsheet for the T1 table, we need to right-click on a list element and select Display Subsheet, or use the Ctrl+D on the keyboard to access the table values here. Next, we will make a plot of these values. Now let's create a plot of these two lists. Let's click on the Plots tab. Just as with objects in other TK-Solver tabs or worksheets, we can define any number of plots on the Plots tab. We name the plot P1 and choose Line Chart for the plot type. We can paste the equation from the Rules tab into the title field of this plot just as we did earlier with the table. If we right-click on the P1 plot row, we can choose Display Subsheet to define the attributes of the plot. At a minimum, we must provide the x-axis list name and at least one y-axis list name. When we give TK-Solver the command to display the plot, as seen in the View tab of the ribbon menu, it generates a line chart by connecting the points created by the corresponding elements in the two lists. Now let's make some changes to this plot. Go back to the Plots tab and highlight your plot P1. When in the worksheet, we can make some changes to the plot. In the Object Properties section, let's tell TK-Solver to display the 0 axis by selecting both from the drop-down menu. Then, let's add a subtitle of A = 2 and B = 6. Let's also label the two different axes by typing their names, X and Y, into the appropriate fields. If you go back to the tab for the plot, P1, you will see these changes are now in place. Now suppose we want to change the value of the constant a from 2 to 3 and generate a second set of solutions. Go to the Variables tab and make this change, and then click on the Direct Solve command located in the Solve tab of the ribbon menu. We see that as a changes from 2 to 3, the value of y changes from 7.2 to 3.6 on the variable sheet. If we ask TK-Solver to list solve right now, then it will overwrite the existing list of y values with the new solutions, and we don't want to do that right now. Instead, we want to create a new list of solutions. Let's go to the List tab and rename the existing list from y to y1. We should add a comment to help describe the contents of this list. Now, when TK-Solver generates the new solutions, the y1 list will not be overwritten. Instead, a new set of y values are created. Let's rename it y2 and add a comment. Let's update our table to include these new lists. Go to the Table tab, rename the y to be y1, add a comment into the heading field describing the contents of this list. Next, add a new list named y2 and add a new comment in its heading field about what is in this list. We can enter column headings to make the table be more informative. Now, let's update our plot. Select the Line Chart P1 tab. Now, let's change the name of y-axis y to be y1. Next, let's add another row. Type x in the x-axis field of a new row and then type y2 in the y-axis field of this new row. Now, select the Plots tab and let's add the subtitle of b equals 6. Next, click on the Plot P1 tab and see our now updated plot. We'll cover plotting in more detail in a different TK-Solver tutorial, but you now should have some basic ideas on how to use TK-Solver to make lists, tables, and plots. Now we should save our work again. This is the end of the tutorial. Thank you for learning about TK-Solver. For more information about TK-Solver and other UTS products, please visit us on the internet at www.uts.com. If you're interested in putting your TK-Solver calculations out on the internet for people to see, please visit calcedge.com.